Welcome to Sacred Truth. You are not coming out the same. What you've been walking through has reshaped your faith, refined your heart, and prepared you for what's next. This message is your confirmation that the process is working, and you are emerging, changed, stronger, and aligned with God's purpose. If this exploration helped you see Scripture as a living challenge rather than distant history, we invite you to continue with my channel. Support thoughtful engagement with Scared Truth by liking this video. Like and subscribe for future reflections where scripture, history, and moral courage meet. And consider sharing this with someone wrestling with questions of faith, authority, or meaning. There is a reason you feel different now. Not louder, not more confident on the surface, not suddenly fearless, but different in a way that is difficult to explain. Something inside you has shifted, and it did not announce itself. It happened quietly, while you were enduring pressure, while you were navigating uncertainty, while you were waiting without answers. The change did not come with applause. It did not come with clarity. It did not come with immediate relief. But it came with depth. This is how real transformation begins. Not with visible reward, but with internal recalibration. Many people believe change happens when circumstances improve. But God rarely begins there. God begins with identity. Because if identity is not reshaped first, any external breakthrough will eventually collapse. What you are experiencing now is not confusion, it is transition. And transition always feels disorienting because it separates you from who you used to be before it reveals who you are becoming. You may have noticed this in subtle ways. You no longer react the same way. Things that once triggered anxiety no longer have the same authority over you. You still feel pressure, but it does not control you like before. You still face uncertainty, but it no longer defines your worth. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional maturity. God often removes intensity before he reveals direction, because intensity clouds discernment. In the past, you may have relied on urgency, on adrenaline, on constant motion to feel alive. But now, there is a slowing, a quieting, not because you are losing momentum, but because you are gaining clarity. Silence does not mean stagnation. It means recalibration. And recalibration is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the truth without distraction. You are no longer distracted the same way. You no longer escape discomfort the same way. You sit with questions longer now. And while that can feel unsettling, it is evidence of growth. Shallow roots need constant stimulation. Deep roots grow in silence. God is not trying to entertain you. He is preparing you. This preparation requires separation, not necessarily from people, but from patterns, from old emotional responses, from inherited fears, from identities that were built on survival rather than truth. You may feel disconnected from your old self, and that can feel like loss. But what you are losing was never meant to carry you into the next season. God does not remove without replacing, but replacement does not happen instantly. There is a space between a quiet gap where the old no longer fits and the new has not fully formed. This space is sacred. It is where transformation takes root. Many people panic in this space. They rush back to familiar habits, familiar relationships, familiar thought patterns, not because those things are good, but because they are known. But you did not rush back. You stayed, even when it felt uncomfortable, even when clarity was delayed. This alone reveals something important about you. You are no longer governed by fear. Fear may still speak, but it does not decide. This is evidence of change. God often changes how you respond before he changes what you receive, because response determines stewardship. What you are becoming now is someone who can carry weight without panic, someone who can hold responsibility without losing peace, someone who no longer needs constant affirmation to remain grounded. This is not accidental. This is intentional. God does not deepen someone's inner life without preparing them for greater impact. Depth always precedes expansion, and expansion without depth destroys people. You may not feel powerful right now, but power is not always loud. True strength often feels like restraint. It feels like discernment. It feels like knowing when not to react. This is the kind of strength God builds before he moves someone into visibility, because visibility magnifies whatever already exists within. God will not magnify insecurity. He will not magnify instability. He will not magnify unhealed identity. So he heals first, quietly, gradually, thoroughly. What you are emerging into is not a louder version of who you were. It is a truer version, less reactive, less dependent, more grounded. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming someone aligned. And alignment always feels strange at first because it removes what no longer belongs. If you feel unfamiliar with yourself lately, do not be afraid. This unfamiliarity is not loss, it is refinement. And refinement always precedes purpose. Separation is one of the most misunderstood works of God. Many people think separation means rejection, that distance means loss, that isolation means punishment. But in Scripture, separation is rarely about abandonment. It is about protection. Before God elevates someone publicly, he often separates them privately, not to diminish them, but to refine them, because elevation exposes, and exposure amplifies whatever remains unresolved inside. God does not elevate people to fix them. He elevates people who have already been formed. This is why the season you are in feels quieter than before. Less validation, fewer voices, more internal confrontation. You may feel less surrounded, but you are more covered. Separation removes noise. Noise from expectations. Noise from comparison. Noise from identities that were shaped by other people's opinions. God separates you from what you leaned on so you can learn what truly sustains you. In the past, you may have drawn confidence from approval, from productivity, from being needed. Those things are not sinful, but they are unstable foundations. So God begins to gently detach you from them, not by force, but by silence. He allows relationships to shift. He allows roles to change. He allows familiar affirmations to fade, not to hurt you, but to reveal something. If peace disappears when affirmation does, then peace was never rooted in God. If identity collapses when roles change, then identity was never anchored in truth. Separation exposes misplaced dependence, and exposure is the first step toward healing. This is why separation often feels uncomfortable. It reveals what we relied on without realizing it. You may feel like parts of your life are being stripped away, but God never strips without purpose. He removes what cannot go with you into the next season. Not everything that worked before will sustain what is coming. Elevation requires capacity, and capacity is built in solitude. This is where many people resist God. They interpret separation as delay. They rush to reconnect, to reattach, to recreate old dynamics. But speed does not equal alignment. God is not in a hurry. He is precise. He understands that what he is preparing you for will require a different level of discernment, restraint, and trust. So he slows you down. He quiets your environment so he can strengthen your inner life. This is not punishment. This is preparation. Jesus himself experienced separation. Before public ministry, he was led into the wilderness, not because he lacked power, but because power must be governed by obedience. The wilderness did not weaken him. It clarified him. It removed every alternative source of identity until only God remained. That is what separation does. It simplifies allegiance. When distractions fall away, you discover what truly matters. When voices quiet down, you hear God more clearly. When support systems thin out, your reliance on God deepens. This is not loneliness. It is alignment. God often separates you before he entrusts you. Because elevation without separation creates pride. But elevation after separation creates humility. And humility is what allows power to flow without corrupting the heart. You may feel unseen right now, but being unseen is often safer than being admired too early. God hides what he values. He protects what he plans to use. This season is not about visibility. It is about stability. Because when stability is established, visibility can no longer destroy you. Before God changes what surrounds you, he changes what defines you. Most people are waiting for a breakthrough in circumstances, a new door, a new opportunity, a new season that finally feels lighter. But God's order is different. He does not begin with environment. He begins with identity. Because if identity remains unstable, any breakthrough will eventually become a burden. This is why the change you are experiencing feels internal, subtle, unannounced, hard to explain. You may not have received new instructions yet, but you have received a new awareness. You are more conscious of your thoughts, more aware of your motivations, more sensitive to what drains you. This is not overthinking. This is discernment awakening. God sharpens perception before he expands responsibility. In the past, your identity may have been tied to output, what you achieved, what you produced, how much you carried. But now, that identity no longer satisfies. Not because achievement is wrong, but because it is incomplete. God is shifting you from performance-based identity to presence-based identity, from doing to being, from proving to abiding. This shift is uncomfortable because performance gives quick validation. Presence requires patience. Performance feeds the ego. Presence strengthens the soul. And God is far more interested in the strength of your soul than the speed of your success. You may notice that things that once motivated you no longer have the same power, not because you have lost ambition, but because your ambition is being purified. God removes shallow desire before he entrusts lasting influence. This is where many people feel lost. They mistake the loss of old motivation for loss of direction, but what is actually happening is refinement. God is removing what drove you so he can reveal what grounds you. Old ambition said, I must succeed to be worthy. New alignment says, I am worthy, therefore I can serve without fear. This is not a downgrade, it is maturity. Identity that is rooted in God does not need constant reinforcement. It does not panic under delay. It does not collapse under criticism. It does not inflate under praise. It remains steady. This steadiness is essential for what God is preparing you to carry, because unstable identity cannot handle visibility. It reacts. It overcorrects. It becomes defensive. But grounded identity responds. It listens. It discerns. It moves with wisdom rather than impulse. God is teaching you how to remain centered even when circumstances shift. This is why he is allowing ambiguity right now. Not to confuse you, but to detach you from certainty addiction. Certainty feels safe, but it limits faith. God does not want you dependent on clarity. He wants you anchored in trust. Identity shift often feels like loss because it removes familiar reference points. You no longer define yourself the same way. You no longer measure success the same way. You no longer pursue validation the same way. And while this can feel disorienting, it is actually liberating. Because when identity is rooted in God, you no longer need to chase worth. You move from striving to stewardship. You stop asking, how do I secure my future? And begin asking, how do I remain faithful? This is the shift that precedes true breakthrough. Not excitement, not urgency, but alignment. God is not preparing you for a moment. He is preparing you for a life. And that life requires an identity that does not fracture under pressure. If you feel quieter now, less reactive, less driven by external validation, do not mistake that for stagnation. It is stabilization. And stabilization is what allows expansion without collapse. Silence is one of God's most powerful tools, and also one of the most uncomfortable. When God grows quiet, many people assume something is wrong. They think they missed a step. They think they failed a test. They think God has withdrawn. But silence does not mean absence. It means preparation. God often becomes silent when he is about to say something weighty, because weighty words require readiness. If spoken too early, they would be misunderstood. If spoken too loudly, they would be resisted. So God waits. He allows silence to do its work. Silence exposes dependency. When words disappear, you discover what you were relying on. Were you relying on God or on constant reassurance? Were you relying on faith or on emotional confirmation? Silence removes the comfort of explanation, so trust can grow without conditions. This is why silence feels unsettling. It strips away noise that once masked insecurity. In silence, there is no distraction, no external voice to lean on, no immediate feedback to adjust to. only truth, only awareness, only God. Silence forces honesty. You begin to notice your internal reactions more clearly. Your impatience, your fear of uncertainty, your urge to control outcomes. These reactions are not failures, they are revelations. God does not use silence to punish you, He uses it to purify your hearing, so that when He speaks again, you recognize His voice immediately. Silence sharpens discernment. It teaches you the difference between God's voice and your own expectations. Many people confuse clarity with noise, but clarity often comes through stillness. This is why God told Elijah he was not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still, small voice. God speaks most clearly when the soul is quiet enough to listen. If God spoke loudly right now, your fear might misinterpret His instruction. Your urgency might rush His timing. So He waits. He allows silence to settle you, to steady you, to empty you of assumptions. This is not delay, it is alignment. Silence teaches patience, and patience expands capacity. Without patience, instruction becomes pressure, calling becomes burden, responsibility becomes anxiety. God does not want His word to crush you, He wants it to guide you. So He prepares your inner world before He releases direction. You may feel like nothing is happening, but silence is active. It is doing invisible work. It is strengthening trust without emotional reinforcement. It is teaching you to move without needing constant confirmation. This is essential because the next season will require obedience without explanation, faith without applause, trust without guarantees. God is not withholding His voice, He is refining your hearing. And when He speaks again, it will not be louder, it will be clearer. Waiting is rarely what we expect it to be. We imagine waiting as stillness, as inactivity, as time lost between prayers and answers. But waiting in God's economy is not empty. It is formative. What God builds in waiting cannot be built in movement, because movement distracts. Waiting exposes. When progress slows, there is nowhere to hide. No momentum to lean on. No achievements to justify yourself with. Only who you are and what you trust. This is why waiting feels heavy. It removes illusion. In waiting, God is not testing your patience. He is strengthening your endurance. Patience is about time. Endurance is about weight. And what God is preparing you to carry will require weight-bearing faith. Faith that does not collapse under delay. Faith that does not demand explanation. Faith that remains steady without reward. This kind of faith is not emotional. It is anchored. Waiting teaches you how to remain faithful when nothing is changing on the surface. And that skill is essential, because in the next season, things will move quickly, responsibility will increase, decisions will matter more, pressure will be higher. Without endurance, speed becomes dangerous. God slows you down now so you do not break later. In waiting, your reflexes change. You stop reacting immediately. You stop chasing urgency. You stop forcing outcomes. Instead, you learn to observe, to discern, to listen. This inner stillness is not weakness. It is control. Strength that has not been tested is unreliable. God tests strength in quiet seasons before He uses it in visible ones. Waiting also realigns motivation. When reward is delayed, you discover why you were obeying in the first place. Were you serving for recognition, for results, for relief, or were you serving out of trust? Waiting separates faith from expectation. Expectation demands timing. Faith surrenders timing. This surrender is costly because it forces you to let go of timelines that once gave you comfort. But in letting go, you gain something far greater. Peace that does not depend on outcomes. Waiting teaches you how to rest without resolution, and that kind of rest is rare. Most people can rest when things are going well. Few can rest while things remain unresolved. God is teaching you to be among the few. This is why waiting feels intense. It is training ground. You are being trained to remain grounded when answers are delayed, to stay aligned when clarity is absent, to remain obedient without immediate affirmation. This strength will matter. Because what is coming will require you to lead without panic, to carry responsibility without anxiety, to move decisively without rushing. Waiting is not wasted time. It is weighted time. Time where God adds internal strength without external evidence. And when movement returns, you will move differently, not from fear, not from urgency, but from confidence rooted in God. God is always more concerned with who you are becoming than with what you are about to receive. This is why inner change always comes first. Many people pray for new circumstances while carrying the same internal patterns, the same fears, the same reactions, the same expectations. But God knows something we often forget. If the inner world remains unchanged, the outer world will eventually repeat itself. So God interrupts patterns before he introduces promotion. He reshapes perception before he reshapes position. What you are experiencing now is not stagnation. It is renovation. God is rebuilding how you interpret life, how you interpret delay, how you interpret resistance, how you interpret silence. In the past, difficulty may have felt like rejection. Now, it feels instructional. In the past, uncertainty may have triggered anxiety. Now, it invites trust. This shift is not accidental. It is evidence that your inner world is being reordered. God changes how you see before he changes what you see, because perception determines response, and response determines outcome. If God gave you new opportunities with old reactions, those opportunities would quickly become burdens. If God expanded your influence without stabilizing your emotions, pressure would erode peace. So he begins where it matters most, inside. You may notice that you respond more slowly now, not because you are hesitant, but because you are discerning. You no longer feel the need to immediately explain yourself. You no longer rush to defend your position. You no longer panic when misunderstood. These are signs of inner authority. Authority does not come from volume. It comes from alignment. God is teaching you to live from conviction rather than reaction. This is essential for what is coming, because the next season will involve complexity, multiple voices, competing expectations, unclear outcomes. Without inner stability, external complexity overwhelms. So God builds calm within you before he increases demand around you. You may feel less emotionally reactive now, less dependent on affirmation, less shaken by delay. This is not emotional distance. It is emotional grounding. Grounded people can hold tension without losing clarity. They can carry responsibility without absorbing pressure. They can lead without losing themselves. This is who God is shaping you to be. He is not preparing you for comfort. He is preparing you for stewardship. Stewardship of influence. Stewardship of responsibility. Stewardship of impact. And stewardship requires maturity. God matures you inwardly so you do not become a casualty of your own calling. This is why the inner work feels so personal, so quiet, so precise. It is because God is aligning you not just for success, but for sustainability. What lasts must be built from the inside out, and God is patient enough to build it properly. There comes a quiet moment when you realize something has changed. Not because life suddenly improved, not because circumstances resolved, but because you are no longer reacting the same way. What once unsettled you no longer holds the same power. What once demanded an explanation no longer feels urgent. What once defined your identity now feels distant. This realization does not arrive dramatically. It arrives gently, almost unnoticed. You simply recognize that returning to who you were no longer feels possible. And that realization can feel unsettling, because familiarity is comforting even when it is limiting. But growth always creates distance between who you were and who you are becoming. You may feel a sense of grief, not because something bad happened, but because something ended. An old version of you is quietly being released. The version that needed certainty. The version that depended on approval. The version that equated peace with control. That version served you once, but it cannot serve you now. God does not erase your past self. He integrates it. He takes what was learned through struggle and refines it into wisdom. You are not becoming harder. You are becoming clearer about what matters, clearer about what drains you, clearer about what you are willing and unwilling to carry. This clarity feels like loss only because you are letting go of excess. And excess always feels heavy before it is released. You may notice that you tolerate less chaos now, less emotional manipulation, less unnecessary urgency, less compromise of your inner peace. This is not arrogance, it is discernment. You have learned, often, painfully, that not everything deserves your energy. Not every battle is yours. Not every voice needs a response. This restraint is strength. It is evidence that you are no longer governed by impulse or fear. God often brings you to this realization before he moves you forward, because awareness precedes responsibility. You cannot steward a new season while still clinging to old reactions. You cannot carry greater influence while still operating from unresolved insecurity. So God allows you to notice the change, to acknowledge it, to accept that you are not who you were, and that is a good thing. This realization does not mean you have arrived. It means you are aligned. Aligned enough to move forward without dragging unnecessary weight. Aligned enough to trust God even when the path is not fully visible. Aligned enough to remain grounded while things begin to shift. Again, because after identity settles, movement returns. And when it does, you will move differently. Not from fear, not from urgency, but from quiet confidence. This is the moment many people miss. They rush ahead without acknowledging who they have become. But honoring this moment matters because it marks the transition from preparation to readiness. You did not notice the moment you changed. Because real transformation is quiet. You did not become louder or more certain, you became grounded. What once controlled you no longer has authority. What once defined you no longer limits you. God has been working within you, reshaping your inner world so the next season will not overwhelm you. You are not waiting to become ready. You already are. Remain steady, remain aligned, and trust that what comes next will build through you, not break you.